talking for a little bit here about managing client expectations. And I think everybody understands that an awful lot of our success and or failure, is about client expectations and hitting them or not hitting them. And I think what I also believe is true about most remodelers is that when we do hit them, when we do meet them, it's kind of by accident. In other words, it's either we just lucked into doing something that, you know, met their expectation, or their expectation was right in line with what we do normally. And so it tends to surprise us when clients either get off track or sort of get, you know, bent out of shape, because we feel like, well, you know, haven't we done everything we always do? And so I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. And I think the other thing I want to just preface it with is that in many cases, the expectations are only being handled with at one level. So it might be in the sales design process, we're dealing with expectations, but then when we get into production, we aren't even thinking about expectations. We're just building something. And then it might also be kind of the opposite, where we're not really dealing with the expectations up front, but as we get into production, then of course we have to deal with them pretty dramatically. So let's just jump right into it. So I like to look at things in terms of a system. And so I have a couple of presentations that I do that use this circle. And, you know, we're going to focus in on the expectations. It'll cover a lot of different areas here. So the main thing for you to focus on is that right at the center of everything we do are these people we call the clients. And one of the difficult things that we have is that we all believe that we work for the clients. And now you may be sitting there going like, what do you mean, Tim? Because I think one of the things that we have to switch in our brain, in our mindset, is that we need to work as a team at getting the client to work for us. And so the idea is, and much like Ed said in or when we were talking primarily, maybe we need to tell the client what the expectations are, but we need to get the client working with what we want done versus the other way around. Now, I understand completely that the client has the money, they're hiring us to do a job for them, but it's a different mindset. It's a shift that we have to make, I think, to start getting the client to work for us. And a good example of this is just this morning, I was on a call with a production manager in Atlanta that I do monthly calls with. And we were talking about the struggle that his design sales team has getting jobs ready to go in the time frame that he needs them to go. And part of the challenge is they're not telling the client, look, here's our schedule for selections. Will you help me make it happen? They're just kind of letting the client figure out and say when they can meet and when they can make selections and things like that. So it's a delicate process, but I think that's what we want to look at. Can we get the client to work for us? Now, the first step in this whole thing is the sales design process. And so the thing that we're looking at here, and particularly these lines right here, are communication lines. And one of the things that I want everybody to understand is that during this process of sales, client expectations are being set. Now, some of them are set by the salesperson themselves. And this is where I think salespeople have to be really, really careful what those expectations are that are being set for the client. So for example, many of you know, I used to work out in Potomac, Maryland. One of our salespeople, most of them as we were going through it, they would go in to talk to a client during an initial sales presentation, and they would say something like, our production people are really great. They're really good at keeping dust out of your living space while construction's going on. And what we started seeing was that what the client heard in that comment was, there will be no dust during your experience with us in this project. And so we understood that the salesperson never said that. The salesperson never set that expectation deliberately. But in some of the comments that were being made, that was the impression that was being given. Now, I didn't expect my salespeople to go in and say, look, you know what? We try to keep the dust out, but it's going to be a mess in here. And there'll be so much dust, you'll hardly be able to breathe. You know, that's not sales, right? So we can't expect sales at times to say some of the things that us production people might want them to say to set the appropriate expectation. So I think we have to be thinking, so if sales sets an expectation in the sales process, what does production do with it later in the circle? Now, that's only one place that our clients are getting these expectations. And so the other place is from all the other sources, the media, other friends of theirs, things that they've read, all those kinds of things are telling these people something. And so they want, and they're making up their own mind about what they think the experience is going to be. The unfortunate thing is that this, well, it's a good thing really, but this communication line is generally fairly easy. In other words, generally this is the dreaming. This is when we have all those fun conversations about all that granite and marble and everything else that you could have in your house, those great gold plumbing fixtures and, you know, all that stuff, right? And so the only thing typically that tends to be a little bit of a conflict is it's always more money than the client wants to spend. But what I think is missing in many cases is right over here, we're trying to communicate to our production team what's going to happen in the project. And so we're handing off a binder to them. And the thing that's very, very often missing is what are the client's expectations of this project? And so we know they're being generated in the sales process, but we jump into handing the product off to our production teams without ever, in many cases, discussing client expectations. And so one of the things that I'm encouraging companies to do is to include in that binder some understanding of what were the client's expectations. And I'll get to some of the details in a second on that, but let's just kind of take a quick look at what some of those expectations may be. Everything's going to end on time. You know, I mean, we would never go into a sales call and go like, you know what, we're going to tell you 8 weeks, but it's really going to take 12, right? So that's not what we do. And it shouldn't take 12 if we said 8, but all right, no dust, no dirt, very little disturbance to everyday life. All remodeling work flows seamlessly. Where do we get that expectation? Right off of those do-it-yourself television channels where nothing goes wrong. And, you know, it's a seamless, clean process. There will be no changes. Everybody listening to this has probably been in a pre-construction meeting and the client says there won't be any changes. And lo and behold, there's 10 or 20 of them in the course of the project. We know things are going to change. They have the expectation that they're not. Therefore, no additional money, right? The budget is the budget. That's it. And this is one I addressed in the last seminar on change orders, but almost every client I've ever run into, if they have allowance, they always think that that allowance is going to fit within their budget, or excuse me, that whatever that allowance is going to pay for what they want in the project. And there's all these kinds of expectations. And so I think it's really important from sales to production to help production see what are some of those expectations that have been set. So now typically a lot of you are doing this already. If you're not, you should be having what I call a turnover or a handoff from sales to production. Now, what we typically do in that is we want the sales team to download to the production team, lead carpenter, project manager, and those folks are in there. And we want it at least a few weeks before the job really starts. Now, because many people are already doing this, I'm not going to belabor, all of that. But what I want to focus in on again is the things that are not written down in contract language or in scope of work or in the plans or in a subcontractor agreement or in a thing like that are the things that are being missed in that turnover meeting. And this is where we set production up for failure or for success if we turn over the right information. So number one thing there, it's in red because that's what we're talking about right here, is that the salesperson needs to come into that handoff ready to share what's not written down. And so what are some of the things that the client expects? And the way you would look at that is, where did they start with this project? What did they bring up in the sales process? And what is it that we ended up with? Now, one of my best examples of this, and you guys will appreciate this, we were working for a couple of lawyers down near the National Cathedral, and they happened to be child advocacy lawyers. And this was about, forgot what year it is, but this was before lead paint became a big deal. And one of our salespeople comes back to us and he says, hey, these folks are really concerned about lead paint dust in the house. And we went like, huh? What is that? And so we did a little research and we bought a HEPA vac for the first time ever. Didn't even know all the reasons behind it, right? We put it on that job site. When the job was all done, it was a difficult environment anyway. When it was all done, the client called me up to talk about something else and then very lightly said, oh, by the way, Jenny, that was their daughter, tested negative for lead. And I went like, oh, I'm glad of that, right? So if that salesperson hadn't brought that to our attention during that handoff, we could have gone in there and just done our regular shop vac stuff and maybe been in some very, very deep trouble. And so that's the kind of thing that we want sales bringing to our attention. Now, there are other things here, and I'm just going to put them up quickly because it's not the central focus, but like, who are these clients? Who makes the decisions? How do they make decisions? This is a great, like you get on a job site and you want a client to make a decision. If you know it takes them 3 or 4 weeks and they only have to choose between A and B, then as a project manager or lead carpenter, you better make sure you give them 3 or 4 weeks to make a simple decision. If they make decisions very quickly, you can wait a little bit longer before you press for that decision. So that's, some of the big thing to look at. But the other thing, I don't have it in red, but I really ought to have it in red, is right down here. Okay, so I ran into a company out in California where the salespeople were sharing with the client 3D videos. Meredith, could you go ahead and mute?
Yeah.
Thank you. But they were showing 3D renderings and videos to the clients as a sales strategy, but they never showed them to the production team. And what was happening on site was the clients were coming to the project manager and saying, that doesn't look like the video. And the project manager was going like, what video? What are you talking about? This is what the plan shows, right? And so, very simple fix. At their handoff meeting now, hopefully, they're showing whatever videos they showed the client, they're showing to the project manager so they are aware of what the client is expecting. Another company, I think mostly a landscape architecture company out of Minneapolis, to their handoff meeting, they bring all the inspiration pictures that the client came to the sales process with. And so the lead carpenter, in their case, project manager, I believe, could see, where did the client start? What was their vision? What did they really want before the budget got honed down to something else? Because when the client comes and says, I thought this, then the lead carpenter or the project manager can go, you know, I remember seeing that in those inspiration pictures, and that would have been really cool to do, but our plans and specifications call for this. And so those are the kinds of things that you want to have conversation about in the turnover. All the details of how deep the footer is and how tall the walls are and how the roof's going to be constructed, that can be read in the plans and the scope and the specification at another time. The stuff that doesn't get communicated in there is what we need to take advantage of from the sales people to the rest of the team. Okay? All right. So after that, we have the turnover gets in the hands, or the job is in the hands of production management. Now, one of the great concepts that I've learned about human expectations and the way people think is that here's the way it goes. In the absence of information, people will fill in the blanks. And then the second part of this is, in the absence of information, people will fill in the blanks, and it's almost always negative. And so one of the places where we lose the clients in terms of their expectations, the job has been turned over to production. We might be, and especially now, we might have 4 to 6 weeks of wait before we start that project, right? And what are the clients thinking? So they have all this media information, all this stuff out there that says every contractor you deal with is going to take your deposit and they're going to leave town and leave you stranded. You know, that's the image that we have. We're not going to do that. We know we're not going to do that. However, if they don't hear from somebody regularly, and I believe that it should be somebody in production. If you have a production manager, they should start communicating with the client. Now, whether it's every week or every 8 days or something like that, but you can use the mail, you can use email, you can use phone calls, but anything that tells the client in very direct, real terms, we are actually working on your project. So, you know, hey, I just wanted to let you know that we ordered all the windows for your project today, and we expect them to be in Rockville or wherever they're supposed to be for you in 6 weeks, which should be in just about the right time to put into your project. Or just want to let you know that we've been working with our cabinet manufacturer, whatever it is. What are you doing to work on their job, and do they have any questions for you? So production management, or if you have project managers that run your job, this is a great thing for them to do. Hey, I just want to let you know your job was just handed over to me. I'm going to be spending the next few days poring over the information and putting a plan together that will make your job run as smoothly as it can for a remodeling project. Wow, what a great thing to tell a client, okay? So that's where we want to make sure we continue to set expectations for the client. Don't leave them on their own to start thinking about other things. Now, what comes after that is planning. And again, there's a bunch of little stuff in here. I'm not going to talk about every little bit of it, but one of the things that should go on right after it's handed off to a project manager or a lead carpenter is they should be planning that job out. Now, if you stop and think about it, on time, on budget, delighted client, right? On time, that's the schedule. Almost everybody nowadays is making a schedule. Okay, we got that. On budget, we want to stay on budget. But I want to ask this question, and be honest with yourselves out there. How many production people sit and consciously think about, how am I going to delight this client? And this is where I talked about earlier. Many times they hire us because we do what they want us to do. We clean up, we do great work, we have weekly meetings, whatever it is. But that doesn't wow the client, right? That doesn't dramatically change their experience so they go out and brag about you. Each client is a little bit different. And so production people need to get information from sales and start thinking about, okay, this client has a particular concern about lead paint. So what am I going to do? Be over and beyond our usual lead protocols that make sure they are super excited about us. Or their main concern is that the kids can do their homework during the day, or the kids are in school at home during the day. What are we going to do? And that's what I want to encourage you to get going, is get your production team deliberately thinking about this. So what does this mean? All right. So basically it means, what are the client's expectations? And then how do I plan to actually hit those expectations and or exceed those expectations? And so, like I said, it might be the dust thing. If it is, you know, you got to really watch that carefully. It might be, you know, we're all home now. Nobody's going to work. Nobody's going to school. And so the, you know, power is going to be a big issue. How do we make sure we keep power on? Because if you drop somebody in the middle of something, all right, well, you know, every now and then, you know, somebody hits a wire and the power goes off. It's not bad when nobody's home. You fix it and you put it back on. When everybody's home, it's a big deal. So production, consciously thinking about how do we wow the client. And then obviously there's a lot of other things that go into this planning, but, you know, we're not going to stay, you know, we're not going to talk about them in great detail. Maybe right here on the schedule, one of the things that I would recommend with the schedule is anything that is the client's responsibility is put on the schedule, and it's put on there in big bold letters and maybe in red ink, okay? Or maybe in red if you use Buildertrend or Co-Construct, some other color. So when they're looking at the schedule, they can see things like selections are due. They can see when draws are due. It helps focus their attention on what? Their responsibilities, and takes it away from your responsibilities a little bit more. And then of course, down here at the bottom, when you're, you know, when a production person is making this list, they, you know, what are some of the things we need to ask sales about before we get into the project? So the next stage is that pre-construction meeting. And again, a lot of you are doing this. This is not, you know, some brand new thing. I think the lead carpenter system got a stronghold in the Washington, D.C. area, and this is certainly part of that. But basically what I want you to focus on here is, what is the production person, project manager, lead carpenter, production manager, doing in this meeting concerning client expectations, okay? And so part of the reason for this meeting is for the new site manager, lead carpenter, project manager, to be introduced to the client and for them to have a conversation about what the expectations are on site. So it allows the team. So we want the project manager to actually be part of running this meeting. And I think this is taking place for a lot of people. I know, you know, 20 years ago, the production manager or the owner of the company ran the meeting. I think more and more companies are getting the project manager or lead carpenter to be responsible for the meeting. Let me just, I'm having trouble. I can't see the chat. If anybody has a question, you'll just have to interrupt me and join in here, I think. Anyway, so, or you wave your hand at me. I can see some of you. Okay, David, do you have a question?
Nope.
Oh, you're just thinking it's a good thing?
I'm just giving you a thumbs up. No chat.
Thank you very much. Okay, so so the idea here, and again, looking at what I have in red there, is one of the things that you want to focus on in that pre-construction meeting that quite typically is not focused on is, what does production have to do to make this job a success. And what I recommend is that the project manager or the lead carpenter just ask the client directly. Be bold and just say it right out. Now, if you're going to do that, you have to have a couple of different ways to approach the client. You can say something simple as, what do I have to do to make this job a 100% success for you? You know, very simple. Or for you to rave about us to all of your friends, what do we have to accomplish on the job site? And, you know, I thought of another one that may be kind of fun, but it's like, for us to get a 6-star review on Google, what would we have to do? Well, you know, 5's the max as far as I know. You know, set it up there. Like, what do we have to do to exceed your expectations? And then sit back and listen. Now, sometimes clients will say, we did this pretty well at where I worked in the DC area years ago. Sometimes clients will look at you like, I'm not sure what you're asking. So have ready a couple of examples, right? So it might be the dust thing. It might be, you know, like now, you know, disturbance, noise in the background, things like that. But just go ahead and ask, what do you want from me for this to be a great experience for you? And this is true for everything, but you ought to be writing down their answers, right? And because that's a physical demonstration of I care about the answer that you are giving me. And so that's one of the reasons why we have this pre-construction meeting. So you can do other things in there as well. Now, here's some of the agenda that I like to share with people. I mean, it's pretty typical for whoever sold the job to sort of hand the job off to production formally. In other words, Mr. and Mrs. Fowler, I want to introduce you to Joe, our lead carpenter, and he'll be managing your job from here on out till you get right down to the end. And then Joe kind of takes over, right? So this also would be one of the places where and you might call it kind of a negotiation with the client about what their expectations are. So the idea here is that you are now trying to reestablish expectations from a production point of view. So for example, remember I alluded to that no dust in the house problem that maybe sales went in and it sounded like they're never going to have any dust. Well, the contract is signed. You're getting ready to start. It's time to be real. So the pre-construction meeting is time to now set real expectations. So it starts with something like this. The job was given to me by Joe, the salesperson, a couple of weeks ago. I've been through everything. And what I'd like to share with you is that all I have to work on is the scope of work and the plans. Are you expecting, use the word, are you expecting anything that's not written in those documents? 99 times out of 100, they're going to say, no, we've been over this so much. We know that what's in those documents is what we're expecting. Now, we know that they're expecting something other than what's in there. We know that. That's part of the process, right? So the very next conversation is, so if anything comes up that's not in those documents, I'll be working out a change order for you on that. Is that the way you understand it? And just ask the questions, right? And so you get them talking about, this is how we deal with things that are outside the scope and outside the plans. And so it doesn't matter whether the salesperson left it out. It doesn't matter whether, it's an unforeseen condition or not. It's just, that's the way it is. And so this is going to happen. So the more you bring it up in the pre-construction meeting, the greater your chances are of not having a problem later on. And then the other thing that comes up in this expectation phase is you go through a number of things that may have been communicated in sales. And so the dust thing, go ahead and talk about it. What's going to happen with dust. Now we're going to do this, and this. And in general, dust won't get into your house. But if it does, how do I want you to respond? What is it I want you to do? And one of the things that I've been telling production people for a couple of years now is take this opportunity at the pre-construction to tell the client how you want them to behave. Okay? So if they don't know how to behave, they're going to behave in a way that may not be helpful. And so and again, where I worked in Potomac, Maryland years ago, we told a couple of horror stories at every pre-construction meeting. For example, Mr. and Mrs. Fowler, on one job, the electrician went out and shut off all the power. And when the client got home that night, all the power in the whole house was off and it was dark, right? Here, if that ever happens to you, or if anything like that happens to you, here's what I want you to do, right? Here's my cell phone number. You call me, or we're going to put a flashlight right here by where you come in the door, and you're more than welcome to try to go down. Whatever it is you want them to do, tell them what you want them to do versus waiting for something to happen and them not knowing and exploding.
Hey, Tim.
Now, yeah.
I'm sure I learned this from you 20 years ago or more, but we added into our contract a long time ago in big red letters, we will coat every surface in your house with a fine layer of dust.
And then what?
And that opens the door for the whole conversation that you just
Okay. All right. And then, of course, what? You're going to make sure it's all cleaned up, right?
Right. We're never going to leave that layer of dust. But
yeah,
that's what they're expecting, and then we don't deliver it.
That's and that's part of what we're trying to say here. We're trying to set those expectations. I mean, again, where I worked in Potomac, Maryland, part of our pre-construction agenda was Murphy's Law. And we would just say, you know what? Murphy's Law is a real factor in remodeling. If anything can go wrong, it will. And here's what we want you to do if it does. And so we tried to set those expectations. Now, moving on down here, establishing a weekly site meeting. So the weekly site meeting is part of this process of managing client expectations. So at the pre-construction meeting, you're going to set up, and if not weekly, maybe every other week, but you're going to set up regular interaction between you and the client. And part of this regular interaction is finding out what are they really thinking about, because here's the way many people think. They see something they don't like. They even, despite the fact that we think all of our clients just rag us all the time, they don't. They see something they don't like and they just stuff it because they're waiting for someone to ask. And so that regular weekly site meeting is a big part of that. We're going to review the plans. We're going to look over the site. We're going to lay out schedule, the laying out all this stuff right here is setting client expectations, right? Discussing pets and special schedules. Like, what about pets? Guess what? We do not take care of your dog or cat. So, right? That's the expectation. So if you're...
Or chase them down the street.
Exactly. And that's the point. We are not responsible for, and you got to say it out loud. You can't just kind of, assume it, right? Now, a lot of companies have started using this homeowner's emotional roller coaster in the pre-construction meeting. Now, if I was going to be using it, I would get rid of all this because, you've already gone through all that. You're starting with demolition. And the way that I would, again, use this is tell the client how they're going to feel. So you can just say, all right, when we get started, we're all excited. Things happen very quickly. And during this phase right here, Mr. and Mrs. Homeowner, you're going to come home from work one day and you're going to go like, man, they said this is going to take 3 months. The way they're going, it's only going to be 2 months. Right there, they've generated an expectation that you cannot meet, and they haven't told you about it. They're going to feel it. And so what you want to say is, if you feel that way, I want to assure you it's going to take every day of those 3 months, okay? And then you say, now look what happens right here. during this thing that we call the rough-in phase, you may actually come home one day and look around and go, how come nobody was here today? I wonder what's going on. Are we in that phase where the contractor just disappears and we can't ever get them back to do anything? No, that's not what's going to be happening. If we're not going to be here, I will call you and tell you, right? But what I want you to see is that you may be feeling in here like this is never going to end. But I assure you, it will start to rise back up on the other side. So tell them how they might feel. Tell them what they're going to experience. Now, this is hard for us because we don't experience any of that, right? And yet they're going to. So many companies, like I said, are using this emotional homeowner roller coaster to actually share this with their clients. Now, what happens after that is we turn the job over to the lead carpenter or the project manager. They have daily contact with the client in some form, whether it's emails or pictures or, seeing them on site. And then the work starts happening. And what I want to emphasize here is the first three here are huge about client expectation. I'm just going to go ahead and stick the others up there so you can see them. But a big part of what the project manager, lead carpenter has to do is communicate with the client. I already said, you know what? Communicate if somebody's not going to be there. So there's a phone call, typically that's the best way, or an email that says, just want to let you know, we won't be on the job site tomorrow or Tuesday or whatever it is because of whatever the reason is. Okay. All studies indicate that customer satisfaction is directly linked to good communication. So within a company, I think you should have a list of like, what do we need to proactively communicate with the client about so that we don't miss those things. Weekly meetings, I'm going to dig into those in just a second. And then obviously great cleanup. Now, the rest of these things are things that are done by the lead carpenter, project manager. I've got to move along here because I want to make sure I get everything in. All right. So these weekly meetings, I really like the idea of a preset agenda because you can really control the way the client feels by doing these things. So typically the first item is schedule. What have we accomplished? What do we have coming up? And again, a particular emphasis on anything that the client has to do. All right, so we're setting the expectation. This is how we're generating with schedule. Decisions that have to be made fits right in. Now, again, one of the things that I've seen lacking in a lot of people's communication is they'll talk to a client, they'll say, I really need those paint colors, by Friday afternoon. And instead of saying to the client, will you be able to make that happen, right? And you can do this in a weekly meeting. We just kind of assume that because I said it, they're going to do it. And so what I recommend is that project managers, lead carpenters in this weekly meeting, when they say something like, we're really going to need that selection done by such and such a time, you look the client in the eye and you say, will you be able to make that happen? And you wait for them to get, in other words, you're setting the expectation that they are a part of this project that cannot be ignored and that their part in it will dictate success. And the second part of that is I just want to let you know, if I don't have them by 3:30 on Friday afternoon, then this is what's going to happen. The schedule is going to have to be readjusted. We're going to miss that date of your son's birthday and blah, blah, whatever it is. It may become more expensive if you want to change something. All those kinds of conversations can take place in this meeting. I like the idea of having some conversations about change orders that are coming up or that may be in process. Where do those stand? And again, the idea here about most of us run away from change orders. We don't want to bring it out because we don't want anybody to change anything. But when you're getting ready to rough in a job, it may be a good idea to ask the client, are you thinking about any changes to the framing? Because if they spring that on you the day the electrician is supposed to start, you're in trouble. And so ask them ahead of time. Don't wait for them to bring it up. And then the same kind of thing would be like, we're in drywall phase, drywall's getting done. Maybe we're going to prime everything before we do trim. So are you thinking of changing, adding anything to that trim package, or are we going ahead with what we have? Next thing would be, what are your concerns as a representative of the company? Now, I want to state right here, the next thing would be their concerns. Anything you can understand about their concerns and bring it up during your concerns, you have 1 point. So for example, you know that the schedule is a little bit off. You are a little bit behind. They can see the schedule. You share that with them, which I think is a good idea, provided you're realistic, right? They know you're a little bit behind. So right here, you say, you probably noticed by looking at Builder Trend, Co-Construct, whichever one you're using, that we're a little bit behind schedule. And I'm aware of that. And I want you to know that I'm working on a plan, which I should have for you next Monday or next meeting, to get us back on track. Now, if you can get back on track before the next meeting, you know, you're golden, you're good, things are okay. Sometimes they're going to bring stuff up that isn't, you know, you'd have no idea what's coming. And so you want to make sure they have a time to do that. One of the podcasts that I did with a client of a contractor in Scottsdale, Arizona, was fantastic. And one of the things that they brought out was that one of the things that made the job very successful for them. Now, I know this contractor, I know they did a beautiful job. I know there were no imperfections in there. But the thing the client mentioned was that every week at their weekly meeting, they asked what the client, I believe, said this, were probing questions to find out, how are we really doing? And the example, I got to hurry here, I got to tell this story though. The example that they used was they had these dust doors with zippers, right? We use them all over the place. But their little doggy wouldn't push his nose through that open zipper at night to go out and do his business. And so it was very disconcerting. So I told the project manager that. Project manager overnight put in 2 zippers and told the last person on the job, make sure you roll that center section up so their little doggy can go out and do his business. So that's what the client bragged about, right? Only because the project manager kept asking, how are things going and what is it that we can do to help you out? All right, so just a little bit about managing clients here as we wind this up. Number 1, be assertive. Don't wait for them. Take control, take charge. Ask for their commitments. Don't assume that because you said it, they're going to do it. Maintain eye contact. Now, I have been told that in some cultures, eye contact is not appropriate. I think maybe Asian cultures, Southwest American Indian cultures, I've heard. But generally in our world, you know, eye contact shows confidence. Don't be afraid to admit when things get messed up. Clients know that. Don't run from it. And document your conversations. Put pictures up in Builder Trend or Co-Construct. Ask them to review them. Look at those things. Ask them to read your job logs if it's appropriate for them to see them, and actually approve what was written in them so that everybody is on the same page. Now, there's lots of other things that go into managing clients, but we'll move right along. And then the last part of this production system, or this system, is the debrief. Again, some people are doing this, but please, please, please don't forget to have a conversation about the client expectations. Were we able to exceed client expectations? Does that show up in our guild quality survey? Does it show up in the responses that we get on Google? Does it show up anywhere where we know we're succeeding in having and really meeting and or shall we say exceeding expectations? All right, so there we are. That's the presentation. Here's my contact information. Obviously, feel free to send me an email. I am available to talk on the phone. About 90% of the calls that come through on this phone line here are spam. So, you know, it's better probably to email me and then set up the phone call. Again, I referred to the podcast a couple of times. There's a lot of great stuff that's coming up in these podcasts. And I know some of you have known me for quite a while. I will say this about the podcast: almost every podcast, I hear something new. I learn something new. I pick up a new tip. And so I'm guessing other people do as well. And then I have a newsletter that goes out once a month. It basically has 3 sections. The first section is all about project management, production management. Second section is about, like, what am I doing for fun? Right now, I'm still going to be putting some stuff out there about fishing and my lobster traps and stuff like that. And then during the winter time, it'll be more about what's blooming in my greenhouse and, you know, how am I enjoying the fire? But, you know, just a couple of things in there. People tell me they enjoy reading it. It's pretty lighthearted. And